Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here. Brad Hay is a world-class Senior Level 3 ParaYoga and Meditation Teacher, one of only 6 in the world and the only ParaYoga Certified Teacher in Australia. With a professional teaching career stretching well over 20 years, he's renowned for his laid-back, down-to-earth attitude as he manages to make yoga's ancient and mystical traditions feel light, accessible, and easy to understand in the modern lifestyle. Brad offers a unique blend of both extensive Tantric Hatha Yoga knowledge and Ayurveda to give depth and effective guidance for the modern yoga practitioner. He is a teacher's teacher and leads trainings and intensives in Australia and internationally that combine these ancient systems, making them accessible and practical without diluting the traditional teachings. Always a seeker, Brad began teaching Hatha Yoga in 1999 and in 2003 completed the Yoga Arts world-renowned 9-month full-time training. In 2007, Brad met his current mentor of 14 years, master teacher Yogarupa Rod Stryker, the founder of ParaYoga and one of the world's leading authorities of the Tantra Yoga Tradition. Rod has officially initiated Brad into the 6,000-year-old lineage of Sri Vidya. Additionally, Brad is a nationally certified Ayurvedic practitioner, and he leads Tantra Yoga and Ayurveda workshops, intensives, and retreats around the world. And after 18 years in the US, Brad relocated with his family back to his home country here in Australia, where he is joining us today. So welcome, Brad. I'm incredibly honored to have you on the podcast.
Awesome. Hi, Amy. Thanks so much for having me.
I very lightly mentioned, of course, some pivotal elements of your path in introducing you. However, would you share with us your story, personally, professionally, how you've arrived here to this moment, considering who you are now and the work that you're doing in the world?
Yeah. Wow. It's such a big question, and I've gone through this one a bit this last couple of years, and I guess I start pretty early. I mean, it could end up being a really long story, but I'll try and do the quick wrap because it's such a jam-packed full sort of however many years that's been. So where did I start? Really, I think generally I start answering this question with as a young child, being a sensitive kid, and being really interested in the mind and how the mind operated and how I operated and what was happening in the world and what were these energies, what were these things I was experiencing and feeling, which I had sort of intense feelings as a kid, the intensity of feelings and emotions. And I used to be quite introspective and introverted in a lot of ways. So it left me sort of seeking some answers as to what was happening in the mind. And I had quite an interest in death at a young age, as kids do. But I remember it pretty specifically starting pretty young, and I used to just question it a lot. And I was sort of interested in what we were other than the physical body. So it was there. I didn't get, too many amazing answers earlier on, but nevertheless, I was definitely looking for them. And then, so I had this hypersensitivity. I learned to manage, in some ways just learned to cope with, and other ways learned to manage. But I'd say there was more coping going on as a child. And you just sort of learn the ways from those around you, your parents and your peers and, my older brother at that point, and start piecing things together and trying to make life work, the best you can with what you have. So I did that. I sort of grew up, I think, as a, pretty regular kid in school. As sort of I got into my teens, I feel like I was a pretty quiet, well-behaved kid. I think that was one of my mechanisms, actually, was to be the perfect child so I didn't end up in trouble like my brother. That was sort of one of the earlier things that I can go back to and go, well, if I'm just the perfect kid, then there won't be any of this this imbalance or any of this sort of harsh energies in the family. So I'll just be as perfect as I can. But while doing that, I think I was suppressing a lot of desires and emotions and lots of things like that. So within that, that old coping mechanism, which we could call a vikalpa or a samskara or something like that in yogic terminology, I think that led me to, ultimately starting to act out in my later teens. In fact, I went to a Catholic college in year 9. I went from a technical college, which is kind of rough, sort of trade orientated kids and stuff like that, where I was A's and B's. And I wanted to be in a ski team. So I went to this Catholic college in year 9. And I wasn't Catholic or anything. I just wanted to go because I had a ski team and it was a little bit more academic. But what that did was squeeze the discipline and I don't know if it was so much a discipline because I had that, but the pressure of the religion sort of squeezed me into or squeezed these sort of aggressive behaviors out of me. So I think that pushed me into a place where I started acting out as a teen. I kind of switched around a little bit and started partying and doing some silly things. And I started feeling, I felt like all of these suppressed, events and things I went to as a kid started coming out. So how can I speed the story up? So teens, I went through that like most regular teens, sports and parties and girls and all that sort of thing. And there was a component of spirituality that I was really interested in, but it came in the form of martial arts. And that started really young, actually. I could probably go back a few years. And around 11 years of age, I started practicing martial arts. And I was pretty obsessed. I was watching a lot of movies and studying these great masters and how they controlled their minds and how they could control their bodies and minds and be wise and calm. And all of these things were really attractive to me. So that was there from an early age. So I trained for many years, but then got into my teens and started acting out and a little bit. I wasn't ever a bad kid. I more just got on a self-destructive path more than anything. And, just to speed up the story, I guess through earlier 20s, sort of some wild lifestyles, lots of drugs and alcohol. And it sort of started off pretty innocent, partying and the surf image and all that sort of thing. But it got progressively worse and more serious and more lifestyle orientated, I think, through my earlier mid-20s. And I traveled around the world on my own and got up to a lot of mischief over there overseas and came back, and I was wearing thin. My lifestyle was getting pretty rough and dark, and my attitude was really declining, and the way I was seeing the world was getting pretty negative. So, without going into the details of what happened, there was a pretty intense few years where, it was almost down to, life-threatening situations of health for one thing. But there was certainly groups of people and situations I was hanging out in that were pretty dark and pretty intense. There was people dying around me and pretty intense situations and people being shot, like almost gangster stuff, which is kind of silly to think back and go, wow, was that me in that whole realm? But it was, and it's pretty cool to reflect on it. So, without the details, I really got into a point where it was getting down to needing to really make some significant changes. And I was getting a lot of messages. I was very blessed with angels or guides or whatever we want to look at them as, because I've had so many in that period of time, especially there was, 4 or 5 major events that should have wiped me out without doubt, a car accident and a couple of other pretty intense things. And by about the 4th or 5th big neon sign from, consciousness or whatever, I actually woke up and said, okay, I need to shift my everything. Basically, this life is not going to continue, or I'm going to die, or everyone's going to die. So it was that point I really surrendered, and I was using a lot of drugs at that point in time, and I was quite ingrained into that lifestyle, but I really wanted to change. So I surrendered, and when I did that, really the help and support that showed up was pretty miraculous. It was like, I could probably go into the little details of different stories about the phone call at that moment, and that person being there at that time led me to where I am now. So that's kind of when the turnaround started, and I went into a really in-depth rehabilitation program. At that stage, it was spiritually based, a lot of yoga and meditation in there. A lot of, the 12-step program was also a big part of that. But that was the turning point. That was about 20-something years ago. And that was the turning point to really shifting my lifestyle into a direction that was more like it is now. It took quite a few years to shake off the old the habits and patterns and things like that, but I progressively did it. And at that time, yoga landed in my lap. You know, I'd already been practicing these sort of deep practices of deep stretching and deep breathing and focusing the mind and meditation through martial arts. But around that time is when it turned into the yoga tradition. And I met my first sort of private teachers around that time. I had they were a couple, a man and a woman, that took me under their wing at that point and taught me some of the deeper teachings and set me off on a path. And, you know, it wasn't long after, as you mentioned in the lovely long intro there, that I wanted to learn more officially. So I checked myself into the most intense program I could find, you know, as the way I like to do things, the most intense I could do them. And that's really, you know, that's really when it set off. I started teaching privates and so forth in 99 and a few classes, but it wasn't until around about 2003 after this program I started teaching a lot more. And that sort of set me off on this path, you know. That got me into Ayurveda about then. This was 2003. And I never looked back, you know. I just went full on into it. Yeah, it's interesting telling these stories. I either want to say it really short or I don't want to leave out any details. So I'll do the mid-range. That's sort of the mid-range. That's, you know, that's still nearly 17 years ago. So there's a lot to fill in there, but I'll leave that.
Of course. You know, so selfishly, I'll give you a little context here. So I did my level 2 yoga teacher training with Yoga Arts, so with Louisa Sear.
Nice.
I think that was in 2013. And, you know, that was a 6-week intensive, and, you know, we did a week of silence and it was magnificent, and Rose Bowden was on the faculty. So with her close relationship with Dr. Robert Svoboda, the Ayurvedic element of the training was so rich, and I really appreciated that because that's when around the time I started to do my training in Ayurveda, my formal training. So with that in mind, you know, a 9-month intensive full-time yoga teacher training is just not really the norm. And I'm sure it was probably quite rare you know, back then as well. But I'm so curious to know what that was like, what that looked like, what that felt like, you know, because that sounds pretty deep and transformational.
Yeah. I'm just laughing because there's flooding memories from that year come back. And it's an all sorts, that's for sure. You know, I don't like to do things half-hearted, so I did seek out the most intensive training I could find. It just so happened it was here in Byron Bay, which was incredible. Wow, what was that like? Well, you know, life-changing in so many ways. To go on such an intense, just to practice that intensely for that amount of time is incredible. You know, most of the time it's a scattered sort of practice schedule, and once a week, twice a week, whatever. This was sort of just jumping in the deep end, and it was, you know, we'd start at 5:45 every day, and with Rose, you know, the same teachers, some different teachers back then, but Rose was definitely one of my headliners. And we're into it, you know, meditate 45 minutes of pranayama, 45 minutes of meditation in the morning, then you'd get out and do your Ashtanga practice or an Iyengar-based practice or whatever it was the main thing then. It was amazing. There was 36 people in this group from all around the world. And, you know, at first it was just sort of feeling into each other and, you know, do you eat meat? I don't, you know, all this sort of weird stuff was going on. I didn't care because I'd sort of come from a pretty, you know, real background. So I wasn't hiding or trying to be anything I wasn't. But there was some sort of adjustment initially. But, and I think a lot of people had the expectations like 9 months training, I'm going to come out ripped. I'm going to be hot. I'm going to travel the world and teach. Professional, make tons of money. And by 3 months in, people are having relationships, people are breaking down, there's tears everywhere, people are flipping out and having arguments with teachers. You know, it was classic. It was just like this ingrained sort of intertwined, truly intensive, which I really believe is so powerful in so many levels. I mean, sure, you can go in and just learn the yoga textbook things and learn everything from the book and learn all the principles and practices, and that's amazing. But until you actually start putting into life situations, it's just basically principles. So having this group of 36 people that were really close-knit and so much time together really sped up the process. So it was quite incredible. But very close with a lot of people, you know, and there was relationships happening within the group. And, you know, admittedly,
sounds like a bit of a purification.
Yeah, it was all sorts of things. But all in all, it was incredible, unbelievable. We became so close, and we became such a force in this town. This group of trainees from yoga, you know, the 9 months training. There was kind of some status around, we're doing the 9-month training.
Yeah.
So that was all a big funny thing. But incredible, and at the end of that, it was sort of, I was living here. So the group dispersed. It was quite a process to detach from such an incredible experience of like-minded people doing these incredible practices, having these, really in-depth experiences. And then for most people to disperse away from the world and to be here,
yes,
left with myself and these teachings. And,
that transitional phase.
Transitional phase. So I hung out here for another 8 months, and then I set off overseas, and I moved back to the US. I'd been living in the US a couple of years before that, and then I went back on another big journey. And things sort of hit next level. And I went back and was teaching full time, and not full time, but full on, and it really set off on a new level. So it was incredible. Like the caliber of the teachers and everything that came together in that training was unreal. Like you say, Rose and connection with Robbie Svoboda. I was really intrigued with Robbie's work. Having the left-handed tantric thing was such intriguing.
Yes.
To me, being, half in the dark and half in the light world. So I was very attracted to his teachings and Rose. And so you've experienced that. So that was, an incredible sort of second foundational set of teachings.
And it's quite rare, really, to get that kind of depth these days as well. Like, it obviously exists, and I'm sure with your experience, particularly through ParaYoga, there's so much richness there in what Rod has been putting out into the world and what you've continued to share through that. And even coming off the back of a standard teacher training these days, which is obviously far more condensed and short, there's still that intensity of the transition back into how do I translate this into my teachings and everyday life, and how do I just get back into my normal rhythm with this integration of all this new wisdom and this depth and this experience. But so as you've reflected upon your path to some degree here, can you think of a significant book that landed in your lap that really maybe shaped you or threw you on a specific trajectory? It may or may not be yoga related, of course, but anything that stands out for you?
Yeah, well, it is going to be yoga related because I'm not much of a reader outside of yoga. So, since primary school, I probably haven't read too many books other than yoga or Tantra Ayurveda books. Honestly, one of there's two that stand out pretty dramatically. And the first one is At the Left Hand of God from Robbie Svoboda, one of the Agori series, the first one of the Agori series. Just the magic that Robbie brings to it, and his sort of his experience of the left-handed path, which is, as I said, has been an interest of mine. It's not something I'm going to do in practice, especially not as a married man with a child. It's not but the intrigue of the potency of the way that they approach practice really got me, that intensity. I was attracted to that. I still am, and in a sense, I still have that approach, but in a different way. So that's definitely one. And just the way Robbie writes, it's not sort of as linear and as systematized as maybe Rod and a lot of modern Western teachers, which is incredible. But it just had a different element of magic and bringing to life this really astro-spiritual realm.
It's probably a reflection of his mentor, like Vimalananda, and because it's funny, it's maybe a crazy synchronicity or not, but that is literally the book I've just finished reading. So book one, I've just finished reading book one. Yeah.
It's a long time ago. I actually don't remember a lot of it. Yeah,
it's been on my shelf for years, and I finally this year was like, I got to get into this trilogy. So and because he's writing, of course, but it's about like all the juice from Vimalananda, exactly, of course it's anyway, yes, I can totally relate. But anyhow, go ahead, second book.
Oh boy, just a classic, a classic one. It's one of the readings in one of my trainings now. It's one of David Frawley's Yoga and Ayurveda, Path of Self-Realization. I can't remember the actual other part of it. It's just simply Yoga and Ayurveda.
Yeah.
Where he integrates, it was just such a perfect integration of Yoga, Ayurveda, and Tantra, which is the three rivers, the three sacred streams, or whatever we like to call it in this system. It was really just an incredible expression of how this is one system. These are not different systems. This is one system, and we're just looking at these different aspects of it. So that book just had such the nuts and bolts of a little bit of Sankhya philosophy, which has become such a hub of my teachings these days. I give it so much emphasis. And then mapping out, just tying together all these little bits and pieces that you learn, the gunas and the vayus and the this and the three and the subtle bodies and the causal body and then the koshas. And you learn all these bits and pieces, but not many people put them together so well so that you can understand the whole picture. And I've been exploring, different aspects for a good while. And that was one of my focuses, like, how can I save people, students, and myself? How can I understand this first myself in a way that I can see all these parts and have them fit somewhere? And then how can I relay that to students? So that the book is kind of, depicts all of those different elements into one sort of place and ties them together really well. So there are two, I'd say. I mean, I've got I was going to put my camera at my bookshelf because I'm pretty impressed with my little library out there. But there's so many books, there's so many, but they are a couple of standouts.
Yes. I'd agree with you. And, I've mentioned Dr. David Frawley's come up on the podcast many times, and I think he's written so many excellent books and just such a wealth of knowledge that are really accessible for, even as an entry level, despite being so rich, So, but hey, since you've sort of mentioned it, let's talk a little bit about the integration of yoga and Ayurveda, because I know that you obviously teach, Tantric Hatha Yoga, you've got obviously your teacher trainings, but this is quite rare, you really offer a specialized training in yoga and Ayurveda. And it's so incredibly important. And this is something that has been really close to my heart for a long time. So I would love for you to speak to, why is this so important? Like, what do we need to know? Like, for the people listening, going to yoga classes, lots of different teachers, and so many teachers are not teaching with that foundational understanding that they can literally translate through into a yoga class of Ayurveda. So would you mind speaking to that value a little bit, why it's so important?
Yeah, I'll do my best to do that in a short time. Really, let me see how I can put it in short words. I think the first thing I'll start with is looking at the difference between, I think this is something people get a little tangled with Ayurveda, the difference between Ayurveda as life principles and Ayurvedic medicine, where they use these life principles of the Ayurvedic, the science of life itself and everything in it, and then put it into a medical science. So there is the principles of Ayurveda that just apply to everything on the planet. Everything, day and night, hot, cold, all of these elements and all of these attributes that we have on the planet. These are the principles of Ayurveda. And then there's this science where they just use these principles in a medical science. So it's good to distinguish the difference, because what I do is we use a bit of both of these, but mostly what I teach is these principles of Ayurveda, which is the principles of nature. So it's about understanding just the most basic elemental properties of life. The 5 elements is what everything's based off. How our bodies are made of these 5 elements, how everything in the universe is made of these 5 elements, and the qualities of these elements. This is the base science of Hatha Yoga. It's the base science of everything. It's the base science of how we eat. It's the base science of herbology. It's the base science of astrology. It's just the base principles of everything in life. So I don't know how we can do anything without at least having a very basic understanding of it. The more I studied it, the more I was like, this is, if I was to label a university degree on it, it would be called common sense. It would be called universal common sense, would be another way of saying Ayurveda in my eyes. So to me, it's the base. It's really essential to understand just the basic principles of Ayurveda if we're going to have a purposeful yoga practice, if we're going to understand anything about diet and individuality, if we're going to understand anything about how I should live my lifestyle that's going to be most harmonious for me. So when I first tapped into it earlier on, and Rose was actually one of the initial people that introduced it to me, and Robbie, it felt like the missing component, because I've been practicing pretty intense tantric practices. And what I was feeling, and it was just some conscious thing that was coming through, it's like, you need to tidy up your life. If you're going to go deeper into these intense, energetic, psycho-spiritual practices, you're going to have to set up your vessel a bit better. This was just coming through, and Ayurveda was basically that. So that's where it's so important that if we are going to do the spiritual practices where we are cultivating so much energy and we are working with these intense energies, the Ayurvedic component to it is supporting or setting up your vessel for the journey into yoga and tantra. So it's the setup. It's sort of like taking your vehicle in for a service before you go on a long journey driving from the East Coast to the West Coast or something.
Yes.
Ayurveda is that setup, and it's more than that, but that's the sort of basic idea of it. It's the setup to prepare you so that you'll get the most out of your Hatha Yoga practices, your meditation, and everything. Because having a healthy, well operating system is just pertinent to having for one, a happy life, but it's just like having your instrument more finely tuned so that you can live life as a more finely tuned instrument.
Yes.
I sort of use all these analogies of vehicles and instruments and things like that. It's like, well, you can just go out on stage and try and rock out with an untuned guitar and it's not going to go so well. Or you can have that thing perfectly tuned by your guitar tech, grab it and rock out on stage, and you're going to be able to express what you want to express better, not through a distorted, untuned vehicle.
Well, I guess it comes down to as well, like when we are more finely tuned, we can therefore be attuned to our greatest needs and what we can, really be self-informed to what we need in any given moment with respect to our yoga practice,
right.
So it's tapping into that deeper, I don't even want to say intuition, just that deeper sense of intellect, like what is really right for us in any given moment, rather than a sense of ignorance or just habit, the habits that we get into with our practices that they're not necessarily serving us, just driving us into the same, habitual patterns. And that's what I found to be so potent about that Ayurvedic understanding. And it's so well needed and I think undervalued even in entry-level teacher trainings in general. And I'm saying that in a very generalized way because I know that's obviously not the case with what you do and what, Yogarupa does, and there's obviously some other schools that are doing that so beautifully, but it's obviously really important. Do you find there's any and it's, feel free to take this on a tangent here into a whole different conversation, but what are some main misconceptions you come across? Perhaps maybe if that's about Ayurveda or Tantra and the integration with Hatha Yoga, like what do you find is one or two of the most common things that you see come up?
Oh my goodness. An overwhelming number of them pop into my mind, actually, the misconceptions. Let me see. Well, one of them, these are pretty sort of basic ones, but one of the misconceptions about Ayurveda is it's basically just about diet and herbal medicine and treatments. A lot of people think it's just about diet. You're doing Ayurveda, so you're going to learn about your diet, which is part of it, of course, but it's one piece of the puzzle. So a lot of people think Ayurveda is just oil treatments, spa treatments, and food. So that's a misconception, of course. Oh boy, where do you go? There's the obvious ones with Tantra Yoga. I'm still baffled at how that is still just people are so confused that Tantra is just sort of, enhancing your sexual sort of life. It can, absolutely, but it's certainly there's such a minor little piece and component. They're only in certain schools anyway that really focus on that. It's one methodology to use, but it's certainly not one of the more common ones.
Yeah, I think it's more the Western world is taking advantage of it and trying to market it and make money from it and sexualize it and,
Yeah, they'll exploit anything and that's cool. It's understandable, but it's just like, okay, come on, we've done that long enough. Because when we're in this world and I've been teaching and studying this stuff for so long, it is a little bit like, oh, really? Do I still have to explain that I teach Tantra and we're not doing sex workshops? I guess I still do. So not so much. I mean, most of my students are pretty informed and they're not coming to me asking, is this a sex workshop? It's like, they know what it is and it's well in the description. So that one's still out there, especially when I'm intermingling with the general public or the non-yogic. Well, not even just the non-yogic, the non-informed yogic public, which is the majority of it. Majority of it still is in that phase. Another good one is Hatha Yoga is a style of yoga. I made an actual post on this the other day because I'd heard it one too many times, even just last week. And I'm like, I need to make a post on this one. And, no matter how much I thrash it out there, it's still like even some leading teachers are still going, oh, I used to do vinyasa yoga. Now I'm doing Hatha Yoga. So, well, let's just have a look at Hatha Yoga is actually it's not a style. It's a pretty in-depth system of practices utilizing the body and the breath and, these integrated practices to work towards enlightenment. That's what it is, whether it's, it's not a style of fast, slow, hot, cold or linking or not linking or static poses or anything like that. That's under the umbrella of Hatha Yoga. So that's a pretty big one. And I feel like that one is, you know, partly due to the yoga studio sort of realm where they have to make up menus and we have to write what a class is. And so I know I've had a couple of studios. I know the dilemma in that, but it just started off where the terminology was misused. I'd like to turn it around rather than, you know, it's like I don't want to conform to the misinformation.
Sure,
I'd rather
yeah.
speak up about it. And even though it's a little painful to do it sometimes and you feel like you're banging your head against the wall, I'm just going to keep doing it, you know, in a kind way. It's not like you're wrong. It's like, no, well, actually, let's use the terminology correctly so we can all be a little bit more in alignment with one another and what each person's offering out there, you know.
Of course. It's interesting. I think that that's a really, really great misconception that you've raised, because it has been on my mind, particularly in the last 12 months, which doesn't sound like a very long time. But, you know, I think it's because what I'm seeing, not even in the community of yoga students, but in the community of teachers, they don't actually understand what Hatha Yoga is. Like, and that's why there's so much misunderstanding for students in the student community, because literally, I think most commonly teachers think Hatha Yoga is kind of like slow and static poses. It's kind of not vinyasa. It's like something, I don't know, I fluffy. I don't really know, because quite often I think, well, what do you even mean by that? So I think that's a really, really important dialogue to be having, because yes, it's usually a label that's slapped on a class where we don't really know what we want to call it, or it's just not vinyasa or power or iyengar or ashtanga, so let's just call it hatha or whatever. Yeah. But what does that even mean, you know? And it's anchored in so much richness of text, like traditional text, and that's, you know, where the juice comes.
It is.
If we figure it out, you know. But that's great. That's really interesting. Okay, so going back to books here, are you reading anything at the moment? What are you reading now?
I've kind of got about 3 different books on the go. I'm not reading them. I'm more, because I've got a couple of new trainings that I'm designing and doing the manuals for. So I'm getting into them. I quite regularly have the Bhagavad Gita as a little sort of an open up. Oh, fantastic. It's one of the best, you know, what are the new sort of Goddess Fairy books where you open a page and nothing. This is kind of my version of that, where you open up the Bhagavad Gita, you read a page or 2 or 3 pages, and it's like, oh my God, how does that relate to my life? So certainly every single time. So that's always in the beside the bed. I'm not reading a book start to finish right now, but a couple that I have out is that one. Honestly, I've been back into the sutras so much in this last year or 2, this last couple of years. I've gone deep back into the Yoga Sutras.
Nice.
4 chapters on freedom. The Pandajit's first chapter book as well, The Secret of the Sutras. Incredible. But because I've been teaching that, and I'm on it, you know, I go back into the books when I'm teaching, you know, different trainings, and man, that is such it's one of the most profound texts that I know of. And that's including all the tantric texts that are so involved and so energetic and so everything. I just think, I feel that the Yoga Sutras is really the base teachings for all of it. It's unbelievable what's in there. You know, you can just dig and dig and dig for years. And I'm understanding things that I was reading 20 years ago on 3 or 4 layers deeper to what I was reading them then, without a doubt.
I can imagine.
So that's a big one. That's one I've been getting into quite a lot again lately.
So speaking of Panditji, let's talk a little bit about lineage, and particularly Sri Vidya and your experience with Yogarupa. I would love to know a little bit about that. Perhaps it's just me assuming, well, it is me assuming that he's probably been one of the most influential teachers in your life. Would you mind just speaking to that relationship with him and your experience in that mentorship and your learning and whatever, as you like.
Sure. Well, I was in Colorado and I was living in a little cabin and 10 acres, with my wife at the time. And we had a satellite dish, and this is how I tell the story. We have a satellite dish because it was off-grid, a little off-grid cabin, 10 miles outside of the smallest town that's as far away from anywhere as you know. So we were 10 miles out of there, way back country. And, it was probably 2 years after I'd finished the Byron Bay training. And so I was in the States. I'm like, all right, that was incredible. But I need a teacher now that's like next level teacher. So I was in the, up in the attic and I plugged the computer into the satellite dish and Tantric Teacher USA. So you can only imagine what was coming up on my screen, Tantric Teacher USA. So, all sorts of prostate massages and it was all there, but somehow I came across Rod's site and I'd heard of him, but I wasn't totally aware of the yoga celebrity scene in the States at that point. I wasn't really that interested in it. And, I just hadn't really tangled myself in it yet, but I'd seen his name and yoga journal conferences and so forth. And I looked on his site, and it was the older site back then, and just the colors and this and the writing. And I saw him, and I was just like, this is sort of feeling like the right thing for me. And I noticed he was doing a training on the sutras. Funny enough, and this is in 2006, I believe, or 2007. And he had just moved to Colorado also. I'd moved a couple of years before. In 2004, I'd moved there, and I think he moved in 2005. And he was just living over the mountain from me, which just over the mountain can be in winter 4 hours to get there, but just over the mountain in summer was about an hour and a half away. So this training was in summer, and it was the sutras. So I booked into the training. I drove over the mountain. I was sleeping in my truck outside this little church hall not too far from his house, which is just outside of Carbondale near Aspen. Just beautiful setting. Colorado is unbelievable. I lived there for many years. And so I rock up first day and I meet Rod, and we connected right away, just as being sort of men, but into these deep teachings, because there's not many of us, So we had initial connection. Then I told him of my teachers, of Robbie, and he was pretty impressed with the list of teachers and what I was practicing and the mantras I was using. So, and I was totally taken by his teachings and the way he delivered these teachings to Westerners, and just the way he managed this group. It wasn't a big group then; it was 30 people, in this little hall. But just the way he managed the group and taught, and he had to pull a couple of situations up. There was a couple of little weird situations that he pulled up pretty sternly, and I was just impressed in a lot of ways, because as a householder, as we call it in the Tantric tradition, is someone who's married and you're in life and you have children. We need a household teacher, and this is what those scriptures say. The teachings say if you're a householder, you need a householder teacher. Sure, I can learn from the bearded dude in the cave that's ready, the sadhu. I can learn from them, but to have it as my primary teacher, if I'm a householder, I need a householder. So he had one set of twins at that point. Was married, had a history, a little bit of history in Hollywood and LA, and a little bit of acting history. And so he'd been in life very much, but now he was in this very in-depth teaching and training and practicing. And all the ingredients fit. And then when I finished the training, and we talked a lot, we hung out quite a lot that week, and it was evident that was the teacher and that was the tradition right away. When I connected that to this lineage that he'd just connected with, probably I think 1999 is when he connected with Pandajit. So he was pretty steeped in the lineage and tradition. So it had everything I wanted. It was like, here's a man, so that's great. I've got a man teacher, which is good for a man to have a man teacher that's a householder, and he's a bit older, so he's got some experience and has embodied and embraced and can teach these teachings in a way that is palatable for Westerners that need to hear them and need to need to really want to embody them, want to start bringing them into life. So we just started there, and we connected after that because he was wanting to come to Australia around then. So we connected outside of it. His assistant and had contacted me, and we were, I was lining up to go to Australia with him back then. And then the next training I went to was about a year later, and his wife was pregnant with a second set of twins. So he's like, well, I think our Australia trip's off for a while. So anyway, so we didn't get to do the Oz trip back then, but I just kept studying. I kept studying and doing the practices and reading the books. And, we stay connected a little bit online. I went to one training a year, I think, for the first 5 or 6 years. I just did 1 5-day training a year with Rod, but felt really connected. Like I felt like we communicated a lot. Through dream time, actually. I've communicated a lot with him in that, and a lot through my practice. I could communicate. I didn't need to call up and say, hey dude, what do you think I should do here? It was all within the practice and the tradition. And that's what I felt early on in this lineage was, wow, the potency of this tradition And to have a teacher who's connected me to this tradition is just priceless in this day and age. So I just stuck with it. And, we got closer and closer. And then, he asked me to assist him a number of times, and I would assist him. And he was going to send me to Asia to represent ParaYoga at one of the conferences there. And we just started sort of connecting a lot more, and I became pretty close with him and the family. And I was just fortunate, I think, in a sense of having both being a teacher-student relationship and having friends without crossing over, because it can be tricky being friends with a teacher. It can be very, very tricky. I don't advise it that often, to be honest. But we've managed to pull it off, and we just got closer and closer. And, we traveled a lot together the last few years in Bali, and it's been an incredible journey, So yeah, I became we initially had the privates that linked me to the ParaYoga, and then you have another one and linked to Sri Vidya, and depending on the studentship. But it's just stayed strong. I haven't even thought of the possibility of looking for another teacher or tradition. It's like my teacher's constantly growing. He's staying ahead of me. He didn't just plateau and learn a certain amount and then just keep turning over the amount under him. He's progressing and practicing. And so, and the potency of the tradition it's hard to explain until you experience it. But once you're sort of embraced by a tradition, you're embraced by it. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
So speaking of tradition, and, you can speak to this either directly through your own experience, or perhaps maybe because you are teaching a lot of teachers, you're doing a lot of trainings, how, and particularly in a Western context, let's say, like, how do we honor tradition? How do we honor tradition?
How do we honor tradition? I can speak to how I honor tradition.
Yeah.
One way to honor tradition is to really be self-aware and accountable for my actions. To always, be alert and be aware that there's teacher and teachings, and they are different. We are a channel for the teachings, but we're still human and we still have all these things. So one way to honor the tradition, I believe, is to really study it and understand it, and only speak to it on the level that we understand it. So we're not sort of misrepresenting tradition. I had this conversation with Rod just yesterday. Actually, we had a call yesterday or the day before, and I brought up the fact that a lot of people are throwing around the word Sri Vidya these days, and it's in some pretty off the side context. I'm like, wow, it's just it's not like I feel like I have to defend a tradition. It doesn't need defending, but on the other side, there is sort of this level of responsibility around it. So we're not just watering it down like so many other things, So I just feel like giving it its dues, offering its dues and speaking to it as it is and not watering it down. I think that's a great way to honor it, and to simply do the practices and embody them. I think the best way in order to honor a tradition is to actually do the practices, keep the tradition alive, keep the mantras alive, keep the teachings alive. And I just don't think there's any better way than to honor a tradition by keeping the teachings alive. That's their dharma. That's teachings dharma, is to stay alive and serve humanity.
Yeah.
So in my eyes, keeping the teachings alive, as authentic as I can do them, and I like to translate them so Westerners and Australian people can understand it and embody it. But just getting to utilize the benefit of them, I feel like that's probably one of the best ways, is to first embody it and live it, and then another way to keep them alive by
I guess it's a great gift and a responsibility to have access to the teachings. It's like you're part of that thread, that continual thread of the evolution and the continuance of that, that tradition and that practice, that timelessness, which is actually so amazing and a great gift. And so, that embodiment is so true, which is, sadly a bit of a cliche word these days, embodiment. But I totally understand what you're saying. And yeah, it's very beautiful. It's very beautiful. And it kind of ties in with what you were saying earlier about Ayurveda. It's like cleaning ourselves up, because if we are holding a tradition, we don't want to be just your average pedestrian folk. We really want to be great people, working on ourselves. It's never ending. So I would love to ask you a few random questions, if that's all right.
Bring them on.
Short and sweet.
Okay. Here I go.
All right. They're just fun. So what is your favorite sound?
I did read this earlier. I wasn't prepared for it though. I didn't get an answer. My favorite sound, man, I've been so huge into music my whole life, and I play guitar and but what is my favorite sound? Boy, this is actually pretty easy now, and it's the sound of my daughter just laughing, like just her heart expressing laughter. That would be by far my favorite sound these days, beyond anything. Just hearing her happy, joyful, and laughing. It's I just feel like everything's okay in the world if she's laughing, So I do my best to make her laugh as often as possible.
I love that.
So that would be it for sure.
Beautiful. Yeah, your own child's uncontrollable, hysterical laughter can lift you out of any level of darkness. It's just the best. It's the best.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite place? Doesn't have to be geographical. You can interpret that how you like. What's your favorite place?
My favorite place is that this has become it's always been apparent. It's actually the meaning of my name. So I'll give you a few answers here if that's okay. But one that's just a general answer is somewhere where there's broad horizons, somewhere where I can see out to the ocean, the vastness. Nice. What that does to my mind is pretty incredible. And then favorite places, boy, Sri Lanka really pops up into my mind here. I have some really magical connection with Sri Lanka. But I'm going to also say right here at home in Ocean Shores, the Byron Shire. I've had more gratitude just in general, but specifically to be in this place this year than I ever would have imagined. So this is one of my key places on the planet, right here in the Byron Shire.
Yeah, we're very lucky in Australia. We have some magical places, that's for sure. Okay, so what is your daily non-negotiable?
I did look at this one too. I could go with the meditation, the mantra and that, but I'm going to go with a cup of tea and a little bit of time at the beach.
I love that.
Not negotiable. Tea's off the bat. That's my wife and I up, kettles on. That's our entry point into the day is a cup of tea. There's the tongue scraping and all that, but cup of tea.
Awesome.
Cup of tea is it, and I really need a little time at the beach every day.
Yeah. Can totally relate. All right. So with that in mind, with your cup of tea alongside, what's your favorite go-to meal or food? Can be food or meal.
Yeah. This one used to be easy, but it's kind of changed over the years. The go-to food. Why is this so difficult? It was Thai for a while. Boy, my wife's cooking's pretty incredible.
If you're stuck on a desert island, you had to eat the same thing every day.
I'm gonna pass on that.
Oh no!
No, I'll give you something. I'm blanking out. I've got Indian foods right there, but that's not my sort of.
What makes you feel good?
Makes me feel chocolate.
Oh, there you go.
Let's just go with chocolate. I love dark chocolate. Really good quality dark chocolate.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some awesome chocolate up in Byron too.
Ayurvedic. There's my Ayurvedic answer. Chocolate.
Well, it's sweet, so that's important. Sweetness of life.
Yeah.
All right. What are you curious about right now?
What am I curious about? Wow. I don't want to start getting political right at the end here, but I'm a bit curious as to what's happening on this planet right now. I'm a little curious as to, I don't get wrapped up in conspiracies too much, but really everything I'm hearing is quite a possibility. So I'm pretty curious what's happening on what strings are being pulled. I'm in trust of the universal thing here, but at the same time, there's some pretty dramatic things happening on the planet, and I'm pretty curious as to what strings are being pulled by who at this stage.
Yeah, I think it's important to stay open.
Yeah, I don't know how to find out, so I'm not going to sit here and stress about it. I'm really just holding ground as to staying happy and healthy and sticking to these teachings because what else I can do right now? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think YouTube is a sacred scripture, so I don't believe that that's a way to find the truth out, nor is any other thing I'm reading on the internet, so I just don't bother with it.
Yeah. The World Wide Web is bittersweet world, comes with so much gift and then can be quite destructive at the same time. So it's tricky. But
Yeah.
yes, that makes a lot of sense. I think probably everybody in the world right now is feeling very, very similar too, for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
So let's talk about what you have coming up in the pipeline, because a lot of the world's gone online and you've got some trainings coming up and whatnot. So would you like to share with us what you're doing?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. At the moment, my next training is coming up in 2 weeks. It's a ParaYoga Master Training. So now I'm teaching 4 of the ParaYoga Master Trainings, and Rod's, authorized me to teach them online, which is great. And so have Yoga Alliance. So the next one coming up is the Vinyasa Krama. It's the energetics of sequencing. So it's the Ayurvedic it's the most Ayurvedic training in the ParaYoga series. So it's really integrating as I was saying earlier, the principles of Ayurveda into how you sequence and make a Hatha Yoga practice purposeful. Not just generally purposeful, but purposeful for whatever, whatever effect you're looking for. Wake up, slow down, you access awareness, you need to ground to the ground. So that training's all about that. That's coming up in 2 weeks. I've got my calendar right here, which is great. And then a couple of weeks after that, I have my level 1 Ayurvedic Yoga Specialist training. It's kind of my, what would you call it? My signature training, I guess, if you like. My Ayurvedic Yoga Specialist, my signature training. So that's coming up a couple of weeks after it, sort of later, 23rd of September. Following that, I'm kind of going in 2-week increments at the moment till the end of the year. Following that is another ParaYoga Master Training, Prana Shakti. That's really getting into the energetics of energetics and the energetics of Tantra Yoga. That's an incredible training. And then following that, Yoga Nidra, my Yoga Nidra training, Yoga Nidra and Restorative, which is coming up at the end of October. And then Tantra Shakti in December. So there's a few more. I've got another 6 5-day trainings between now and December, just on the board now. And that's what I'm focusing on at this stage. As soon as I'm not traveling, which is amazing this year, because last year was pretty out of control with 50 or so flights or something. It was a lot, 3 or 4 trips to Bali. It was heavy duty. So yeah, what a blessing to be able to kick back at home and do this all online. So yeah, I have those coming up between now and the end of the year. So they're all different trainings that are all part of my 300-hour advanced training setup, and they all accredit towards that. And the ParaYoga ones give you certification for both my training, my 300-hour advanced training, and ParaYoga training. So you get a double, you get a twofer there.
And can anybody do these courses, or do you need to have a certain qualification or experience already? Are they entry level as well as obviously for teachers? But, if anyone just wanted it just for the richness of the information, the knowledge as a student.
Absolutely. There's no prerequisites as for you. You don't need to be a 200-hour teacher. If you're doing a certification process, yes, you need to have a 200-hour certification to then extend on. And that's the same for any 300-hour training. But I open these trainings up for anyone. If you want to just read the content of the training and you have an interest in it, jump on in, and some of them require a little more background knowledge, but I generally cross over in each training. I don't generally speak about the values without giving a little bit of it, at least a short description. So generally they're all designed that you can pop in and do them all. There is sort of an ideal order, Ayurvedic Yoga Specialist 1, Vinyasa Krama, Tantra Sutras. You can do it in an order. But generally I open them to anyone, any seeker, any yogi, anyone that wants to learn these teachings can jump into any of them. I welcome them. For sure.
That's fantastic. Great. And so whenever the world gets back to normal, if that's such a thing, when we can start to travel and do all this kind of stuff in person, where are you normally generally doing in-person trainings, or is that a really big question?
Yeah, well, last year, just for example, I just did all the major cities. I was teaching Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Adelaide. So generally the capital cities of Australia. I've only been back in Oz for 18 months, but I did quite a few rounds of cities last year. Bali a couple of times a year, 2-3 times a year. I did a little bit here in the Byron Shire as well. So all around, when it does open up again, I'm open to come if people want to sort of, host any of these trainings.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great.
To it, yeah. So all around Australia. So it'll be up. We'll post about it. I'm looking forward to doing a bit of it again, but I think I'd like to cut in half what I was doing.
Yeah,
it's a lot of
conserve your
travel
energy.
and a lot of time away. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's such a great gift because, even with all this lockdown and COVID stuff, I've done so much study and training that I would have never have had access to, particularly because I'm a parent. I can't just pack up and go somewhere like I used to in my 20s, so it's such a gift to be able to access this kind of stuff online. But of course, there's, learning in person, there's nothing better than being with the teacher and being with that group as well. So they're both awesome and both potential prospects. But no, that's fantastic. Thank you. And so in light of all this information, where can the listener find you?
Website is bradhay.com, Bradhay. So that's pretty straightforward. And I am actually on Instagram. I'm starting to get better at posting on there too, which is amazing. Bradhay32 on Instagram. And I think you can connect to my Facebook on there. I'm just Brad Hay. Brad Hay Yoga and Ayurveda, but just Brad Hay is probably my more active Facebook page as well. So yeah, all the events are on bradhay.com. I post them pretty regularly on Instagram as well. That is a good way. I'm starting to use that platform a lot more to just sort of share different things and share events and everything like that. So they're probably the best two ways. Yeah. And you can feel free to email us through the website, or you can sign up for the newsletter, and that way you'll keep posted on events and so forth. And, I answer a lot. I don't want to overwhelm myself, but I do answer still as many as I can, private emails,
Yes. Well, the website's beautiful. The website's really beautiful.
Thank you.
So
yeah, we needed an upgrade and we gave it one. So it's getting there.
Awesome.
It's getting there again.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, it's easy. So yeah, I've had a little peruse on there, and it's very easy to find all the trainings and stuff, which is very exciting. So, but hey, thank you so much for your time today. I've had such fun chatting with you. It's been really, really great. I'm really appreciative for you being here.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I'm stoked to be on here.
If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favor and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.